Okay, good afternoon. My name is Anita Nielsen, and I'm the Senior Director for Annual and Plan Giving at Toronto General and Western Hospital Foundation. And I'm delighted to welcome all of you today for our fall behind-the-scenes lecture. Thank you so much for coming. It is our 8th consecutive year that we have been featuring lectures on a whole variety of topics supported by our donors, from cardiovascular disease to arthritis to diabetes, depression, and today on multi-organ transplant. None of this, as I said, would be possible without the ongoing support of our donors. So on behalf of everyone at the Foundation, I thank you so much for your continued support and investment in our programs, making healthcare in our city and globally so much more accessible and with much more promising outcomes for everyone. For those of you who've had an opportunity to read Report on Your Support, you'll know that Dr. Gary Levy, who is featured on the cover alongside one of his grateful patients, Megan MacArthur, will be speaking with us today. Copies of Report on Your Support are available at the registration table. We're delighted that Megan will be joining us, and she will be talking briefly about her experience as a liver transplant recipient. Additionally, we're pleased to welcome Dr. Atul Humar, who is the new director of the multi-organ transplant program, recently having taken over from Dr. Gary Levy. Dr. Humar will share with you some of the vital research that is being done at Toronto General and Western Hospitals to advance the treatment and care for transplant patients. I'm going to take this opportunity to formally introduce Dr. Humar, who will then introduce Dr. Levy and Megan. Dr. Humar was appointed in September 2013 as the medical director of UHN's multi-organ transplant program, as well as being a professor in the Department of Medicine, Division of Infectious Diseases at the University of Toronto. He also serves as director of the University of Toronto Transplantation Institute. Prior moving back to Toronto, Dr. Humar was most recently professor in the Department of Medicine at the University of Alberta, where he served as the director of the Alberta Transplant Institute. He received his medical degree from the University of Ottawa and completed his clinical and research training in infectious diseases and transplantation in Toronto and Boston. His research interests are in virology with a focus on herpes virus infections post-transplant, and he's involved in both basic and clinical research assessing immunologic and virologic determinants of viral infection. Dr. Humar is internationally known in the transplant community and has played an active leadership role in both the American Society of Transplantation and the Transplantation Society. He's also very active in the Canadian Society of Transplantation and currently serves as the vice president. Dr. Humar has initiated the development efforts for several transplant-related guidelines and policy statements and has received numerous honors and awards, including Canada's Top 40 Under 40 and various research-related awards. Without further ado, I would like to welcome Dr. Atul Humar.
Thank you for that kind introduction. I'm no longer under 40, unfortunately, but thank you to all of you for coming today and listening to myself and Dr. Levy and to Megan about our multi-organ transplant program and some of the successes we've had and some of the views as we look towards the future of transplantation here at UHN and how we believe it can really impact transplantation and patients around the world. So if you could put up my presentation, please. So I'll start with a brief background about the multi-organ transplant program, or MOT as we call it, and then I'll introduce Dr. Levy and Megan, and then we'll finish off with a view of what we believe is the future of transplantation. So we're a true multidisciplinary team, physicians, surgeons, nurses, coordinators, pharmacists, and numerous other professionals. In fact, it takes a team of several hundred people to perform organ transplantation, and only a fraction of those people are shown here. We're by far and away the largest transplant program in Canada. We're one of the largest programs in North America. Several examples: we have the largest living donor liver program in North America. We're a lead in something called the Paired Exchange Live Kidney Donor Program across Canada. We head the University of Toronto Transplantation Institute, and I could go on and on about the firsts that have been achieved by this program. What is multi-organ transplantation? Well, it involves a number of different clinical programs and research programs. At this site, we do kidney transplantation, a liver transplantation, heart transplantation, lung transplantation, pancreas transplantation, and small bowel transplantation are the main organ transplants that we do. And here you can see a picture of a man who received a liver transplant from a living donor. We're recognized around the world as global leaders in transplantation. We've transplanted patients from all across Canada and all around the world. But what this shows is actually people from different countries that have come here to learn and to train, to learn surgical techniques, to learn medical techniques, and to learn how to do organ transplantation. They come to Canada, they come to Toronto, and they take that knowledge back to their home country. Now, the true success of transplantation is in our patients, and transplantation is one of the few areas in medicine where you can literally transform a patient's life. So patients go from leading a terrible quality of life or literally being at death's door often, only having weeks or months to survive, and their lives are literally transformed. If you talk to patients who have had transplantation, they look at it as the defining moment of their life. It was the moment that everything turned around. So it is truly a miracle of modern medicine. One of the areas where we're very proud of is living donation transplant. We have one of the largest living donor programs in North America. And just to give you an example, this is two friends, one of who donated a piece of their liver to their best friend and saved her life. And if you look at the number of live donor liver transplants we've done here, we're now over 500 live donor liver transplants. And you can see, compared to the rest of Canada, we're really the epicenter of living donor transplantation. We've had a number of very high-profile transplants. Many of you will know Helene Campbell, who received a double lung transplant about a year ago and has been a tireless advocate for organ donation and transplantation. She was on the Ellen DeGeneres show, and as many of you know, she was also in touch with Justin Bieber. And here she is dancing with various members of our program. So with that background, I'd like to start you on a journey about the future of transplantation. And to start with, I'd like to call Dr. Levy up on the stage. Now, Dr. Levy is a former director of the transplant program, but he's actually the founder of multi-organ transplantation at UHN. So he actually started it all. I could spend an hour talking about his CV and all his accomplishments, but needless to say, he's a pioneer in organ transplantation, and really he built this program through dedication and hard work. And I'm just going to say that he's also my mentor. He actually trained me many, many years ago here in Toronto, and I was very happy to come back and work with him. So, Dr. Levy.
Okay, so you can all tell that I'm definitely not under 40. Okay, but what I will do is I'm going to walk you through, I'm going to set the stage for Megan's story. What I will do is I'm going to get Megan to tell her own story, and this remarkable young woman who I'm very admiring of for her courage, and I think you'll come to understand it when you listen to her. And I really believe the day is about our patients and Megan. First of all, I want to acknowledge Atul. There's nothing nicer and where you can be more more proud than one of your students exceeds your wildest expectations and even becomes more brilliant and achieves more than the mentor. And I'm so admiring of Atul. I'm delighted that he's back here in Toronto. Okay, so first of all, the success of transplant in live donation can be shown here. This is a young child who has biliary atresia, which means they have no bile ducts. This is his father, and the little bite on his neck here is not a mosquito. This is a week after he donated the left side of his liver to the child. That's the child 1 week later. And then this is the child 2 months later. And this is the child 1 year later. And incidentally, the child, the bigger child, is the transplanted child. And these are identical twins. And so the boy is, no, they can't be identical. These are twins. And so the boy is extremely jealous of his sister, who has grown up to be bigger than him. Now, I want to just say transplants come a long way, as Atul said, from when I first started. In the early days when we started transplant, and Dr. Cole is sitting out in the audience, the survival rates were, shall we say, meager. And very often patients did not survive. The survival rates were 40 to 50%. Rejection rates were 60%. And today, 1 year survival rates are as high as 90 to 95% with low rejection rates. And so we've come a long way. However, long-term results are not as good, and everybody knows that who's involved in this specialty. The reality is that patients suffer a lot of complications post-transplantation, and these are just listed here. Many patients who undergo lung, liver, or heart transplant develop chronic renal failure, will require kidney transplants. They often will develop cancer. You'll hear a little bit about that when you listen to Megan. They develop infections, disease recurrence, and they have about a 10 to 15-fold incidence of cardiovascular disease. So although the short-term results are excellent, we have a long way to go to really return these people to normality. And I'm not going to go through these slides. We have embarked on a journey here at the University of Toronto, and it's based upon a discovery from a very brilliant young surgeon in the United Kingdom, Sir Peter Medawar, who won the Nobel Prize for a very sentinel discovery. And that was with his co-worker, Ray Owen. They found that in animals, where two animals were born, even as long as the circulation, the placental circulation, didn't have to be identical, but they shared cells, you could take tissues from one organ and move it into another. They were tolerant to each other because of this shared circulation. And for over 50 years, many scientists have been trying to understand what the basis of this tolerance is. And many attempts have been made, some successful and some not. So we've assembled a group of scientists here at the University Health Network, and Atul is now assuming the leadership of this program. And we hope, and we'll tell you a little bit about the journey. It's based on basic research, and we've now taken it to the clinic. And Megan will tell you her story in a moment, and that is to try to induce a state of tolerance so that people can be removed from their immunosuppression and accept their organs without the need for immunosuppression. And I think this will transform transplantation beyond. Now, it started in the laboratory, and we're not cruel to animals, but we had to start somewhere. And in this case, we would remove a heart from a white mouse. It's still red, incidentally, and we would implant it into a black mouse. Now, if we use no protocol, no immunosuppression, those transplants would be rejected very rapidly. And this just shows that we would lose those hearts in about 20 to 25 days. And we developed a protocol, and when I say we, of course, it's my students in my laboratory. And in using a tolerizing protocol, we were able to get 100% acceptance of those grafts. And based upon that, we then set upon trying to understand at a genomic and proteomic level, how does this work? How could we achieve this type of result? Now, imagine this is a Picasso. Don't imagine that this is 30,000 genes, because it becomes overwhelming. So here's a picture up here of what all of us look like, and some of our genes are downregulated and some of us are increased. And here's a group of people who've undergone transplants and they're undergoing rejection. I hope I can convince you that the colors here are different from the colors there. If I can't, you're colorblind. But that's in essence all you need to know. And then the final picture, which is a group of 12 animals, and they're all tolerant to their grafts. And I hope what I can convince you is they're not like normal, naive animals, and they're not like rejecting animals. And they've had shifts in their genomics. Now, I'm not going to go through this today for time, but to just tell you there are a broad group of genes that we identified and report, over 158 that were either upregulated or downregulated, that we could correlate with this entity called transplant. But in short, what we did find is that we as a species, and of course these are mice, we found that we have a great plasticity or a potential to accept foreignness if we can find a way to manipulate these gene profiles. And ultimately it's dependent upon the presence of some very super specialized cells in these grafts. And I will tell you, we've subjected Megan's graft and her peripheral blood to this, and her profiles are identical to what we're seeing in the mice. So we then were able to, using a biostatistical approach, identify 26 genes, narrow down those 158 to 26 genes, and use these as a biomarker platform to study a group of other animals which we transplant. And I hope what I can convince you is these are tolerant animals, that some of these genes were overexpressed during the tolerizing protocol. And it doesn't matter if you understand what they are, but they give us an imprint as to whether or not these animals were tolerant. And then, of course, we can take measurements from the peripheral blood or from the tissues, and we can study the gene expression during the course of the transplant and use those. And we can even narrow it down to 6 genes now, and using those 6 genes, we can determine whether or not, at least in the animals, whether they're rejecting or not. Have others been able to reproduce our results? And the answer is yes. This is a group at Northwestern University using the same approach that we did, and they found that these super specialized cells in the livers of individuals who are tolerant are upregulated, and if they have these, you can withdraw immune suppression. Now, what we have done, and I'm going to stop here, is Megan came to us, and she'll tell you her story herself, and had some problems, and clearly we had to make a difficult decision with her. And I'm happy to tell you that using this protocol, we were able to produce a state of tolerance. And I think that today, this is the story that we want to relay to you. And we're hoping here at UHN, we're not hoping, we now plan, and with approval, which we've obtained from Health Canada preliminarily and from the FDA in the United States, to conduct a broad trial to establish tolerance in our transplant patients so that we can get many, many more off of immunosuppression. Now, we're going to start with liver, and I see my colleagues here from other programs, and the plan is to extend this to other systems once we're sure that this works. So I'm going to close here by just saying that if this does come to pass, this will revolutionize transplantation, and the downward curve that I showed you will be a curve of the past, and we will start to really restore these people to normalcy, which is our long-term goal. Thank you very much. And maybe what I should do is ask Megan MacArthur, who's our patient today. Megan, I've known, I told my wife that Megan may come home and live with us, and that's only because I practically have adopted her as a daughter, and I'd like her to come up and tell you her story and to relay what has happened to her in her young life. I consider Megan a real hero because of her courage and bravery through all of this. Megan.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much for having me here. It's a real opportunity to be able to speak to you directly and to be a part of everything that you've seen so far. Forgive my nerves. It's quite something to be in front of you. My story, I first fell ill when I was a teenager, and I learned that I had liver disease. But it was going to be about 7 years before I had my transplant. And in 2008, I was 26, and I was a new grad. I was a new teacher, and it happened quite quickly. I went into liver failure, and I had to, well, a lot of things stopped. I had to stop my teaching, and at Montreal at St. Luke Hospital is where I had my transplant, and it went well. We had a few little hiccups, but everything from that point on, as was said before, everything was different. It was a defining moment in my life, and it remains one. I had a new body afterwards. Things didn't work the same. My life was different. I had a new way of life. I had medication for life, and follow-ups and close care by my doctors at the hospital, and a lot of visits and a lot of trial and error. And that was just, I had been used to chronic illness and adapting, but that was just it was par for the course. It was something that I accepted. I was a patient, and I had become a good patient. I was used to being a patient. And what I realize now in retrospect is that it often interrupted my life. I was either a patient or I was living my life, and that's no longer the case. I recovered and I went back to teaching. I'm an elementary school teacher, and it was really important for me to get back to my classroom. And it was a huge part of my identity, like being a patient. If I wasn't ill, I was teaching. And a goal that I always had was to complete my master's in education, and the program that I was interested in was here in Toronto. And Ryan, my partner, was also working and living here, and long distance had been long enough. So I made a big change and took on a new challenge and moved here to Toronto to pursue my master's. And I wanted to do something that wasn't because of my health. I wanted to do something that was just for me and for my goals. And I now think of it as not being in the right place at the right time, but being in the best place at the best time. Because in August, about 4 weeks before my classes started, I fell ill with a viral infection with CMV. And it put me in the hospital for 3 weeks here at Toronto General, and it tested my liver. And that's when I got to meet Dr. Levy and the team. And that was the beginning of my relationship with UHN and with the team here at Toronto General. I quickly realized that being cared for here and under Dr. Levy's care was equivalent to success. 3 weeks later, I was in classes full-time, attending as a full-time student at OISE. I didn't miss even my first day of class. So my care was transferred here, and right from the beginning, Dr. Levy, right from the start, he took an interest in me as a whole person. We looked together about how to improve my quality of life. We made a plan to reduce my immunosuppression medication, which I never realized was really an option. It was something that I had accepted as just par for the course. So I was already on less medication, down to 1 or 2 pills a day versus many more than that. And it changed, just that move changed my everyday life, my quality of life. The stress on my liver was different. The stress on my day, the side effects as well reduced. So this moving to Toronto and starting at OISE and starting my care here was a really new way for me to be a patient. It was a new way to be cared for and to care for myself and be cared for. And my family and I joke that I have the greatest GP in the world, world class, because I'm not just, it's not just a liver specialty anymore. I'm taken care of as a whole person. We make the plans together. I was so impressed with the size and the scope of UHN. The leadership that happens here, the teaching, the research, it all happens right here, and I got to be a part of it. And despite its size and its world-class reputation, I was never seen as just another number or just another patient or a blue card. I was always recognized as me. I was recognized by name. And the 12th floor, our clinic, became very familiar, but not in a bad way. in a way that I was a part of the team and in a successful and in a hopeful way. So as I got settled here in Toronto, I also was settled and connected here at Toronto General. As an educator, as a teacher, we strive for lifelong learning. It's in all our research, it's in all our studies, it's in our hearts as teachers, and we look for it in ourselves and we look for it in our students. And the big question is, how do we get there? How do you become a lifelong learner? And I think the answer lies in building relationships, and the kind of relationships that nurture you, that encourage you, but that challenge you as well. And also kinds of relationships that will scaffold and support you and allow for hope to be there. And those are the types of relationships that I've come to know here. That's what I know here as part of the program and the work that you enable to happen. The last 3 years that I've spent here in Toronto have been the most influential, hands down, and some of the most challenging of my life. Dr. Levy has been there for me as a guide. He's been my advisor. He's been my cheerleader. And I'm very blessed to have him in my corner. He was there every step of the way, as was the team. And in my second semester of studies, I fell ill again. And it was a consequence of the immunosuppression regime and the medications that I had been on, even though we had reduced them after my transplant. I developed lymphoma, and I really wasn't ready for it. I don't think anyone could ever be ready for it, even though it was a possibility, as Dr. Levy explained, of it coming up after transplant. I wasn't ready for it, my family wasn't ready for it, but my team was ready for it. And my UHN family grew and included Princess Margaret across the street and Dr. Curvilla and his team. And I was shocked. It was difficult, but I was never alone. I had a phenomenal support system, both at home with my family and friends and here. And when it gets tough is when you really get a chance to see the most beautiful part of people. And I was very, very lucky, very blessed. We fought and we won. I did rounds of chemo and went into remission and went back to life yet again, living as a patient and as a teacher, and not quite putting those together just yet. I had a new body yet again. It worked differently, but I had more opportunity because I was on so many less medications. I almost made my 1-year report card, almost passed. The recurrence for lymphoma is higher in the first year, and I made it 11 months and 2 weeks, and it reoccurred. So we went back to the fight, and Dr. Levy and Dr. Curvilla recommended the treatment and the protocol that he just reviewed with you here, involving high-dose chemo and a stem cell transplant. And that allowed me not only to beat it again and have a second remission, but it led me to tolerance, which is what he was explaining. The stem cell transplant was probably one of the hardest things that I've ever been through, but it had a silver lining. And at the end of it, I was tolerant. And I say that the greatest gift that I've ever received was my liver. And I think the second greatest gift that I've ever received was it becoming mine for keeps. So there's no strings attached anymore. I have my liver, and I'm on absolutely no medication for the transplant. I've been off immunosuppressions for just over a year. And it's been total, becoming tolerant has been freedom from everything, from the side effects, from the planning, from the close visits. It's given me a very different future. It's changed the trajectory. We were looking at so many trajectories and graphs, but it's changed my trajectory, not my health trajectory, but it's changed the trajectory of my life in overall, and of my family, and of Ryan, and our future, and our hope to have a family, and everything is now different, and everything has a better has more hope, has a better chance. I don't have to, I now realize in retrospect, I'm not going back again. Sorry. I've always been trying to go back to teaching or make it back. And this time I just get to start from where I am and go forward. And you can't step in the same river twice is what my dad always tells me. And I've learned so much. I've discovered who I am as an individual, as a woman, as a teacher, as a student, as a team member, and what it is to be part of something that's larger, that's special, and that's so specialized, and part of this community. I've always felt important. I've always felt like I was a priority, and that I could make a difference, and I was the one that was being helped. I was the patient. So I've always found that very remarkable. I'm healthy, and I'm inspired, and it's thanks to Dr. Levy and the team here and everything that you've made happen. And I'm very grateful. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That was very touching. And there are many stories like that in transplantation. They're all very touching, and you can see how transplantation really affects people's lives and their families. Now I'm going to tell you a little bit about where we're going over the next 5 years, 5 to 10 years in transplantation. So what's our vision? Well, I think really we want to aim to be the best program in the world. We want to be the place where things are made to happen. And we want everybody in the world to say, look at what they're doing in Toronto. We want to come there to learn, to train. We want our patients to set an example of what is possible with the transplantation and transplantation-related technologies. And I think we have here at UHN what I call the perfect storm. So we have excellent people, both clinical and research-wise, and we have a critical mass of these people. We have very innovative technology platforms. We have strategic partnerships all across UHN and our sister hospitals. And really we have dedicated and strong philanthropic support, and that I think makes the key difference, because to develop these technologies and to enhance transplantation and medicine takes a strong investment, and I think that is what's really recognized here in Toronto. So I believe that we have an opportunity to move things to a whole new level. And this is our transplant activity over the number of years. That means how many organ transplants do we do year by year. So you can see, in the 1980s, we used to do less than 200 transplants a year. Last year, we did almost 500 transplants in the year. And what we predict is that over the coming years, through innovative technologies, improved ways to use organs, we can double that number over the next 5 to 10 years. And if we want to transform transplantation here, I believe that there's several key aspects of it. It includes clinical innovation. We want to recruit and retain the best people in the world to do research and to do clinical program development. We want to look at our research platforms and really develop them and move them to clinical practice. And we want to also be a beacon for education for trainees from around the world. So one of the things that we've been working on is a number of what we call strategic initiatives or transformational initiatives, things that will change the way we do business in transplantation. And I'll run through some examples of these. So one is ex vivo organ repair, and this involves, I'll explain that in a little bit more detail. The second is tolerance, as Dr. Levy talked about, and we have our first patient who has benefited from this, but we believe that we can now move this to larger clinical trials of kidney transplantation-related tolerance and liver transplantation-related tolerance, where patients are actually able to get off their immune suppression drugs. I'll talk about a few more. strategic initiatives, something called Regenerative Medicine, whole organ bioengineering, and then new transplant programs that we'd like to introduce. So let me talk about ex vivo organ repair first. So normally when we take an organ from a deceased donor, about half the time the organ is too damaged to be able to actually use. And this means that we actually end up discarding valuable organs that could otherwise be used to save lives. And one way around this is to actually repair these organs outside of the body. So they're taken, and here you can see this is a set of lungs that's put in a box, put in a bubble, and it's perfused with blood, it's oxygenated, and then the organ is actually repaired. And UHN was the first in the world to do this successfully for lung transplantation, and the first in the world to set up a clinical ex vivo organ repair program in lung transplantation. And what we'd like to do next is to expand this technology to other organs, so to let us use this technology for liver, here in the corner, or kidney, or heart. And you can see this example of a heart that's beating ex vivo. And you can actually repair the heart while it's on this ex vivo machine. So you can do bypass surgery on the heart, for example, if you need to, and make sure that it's functioning properly before it goes into the recipient. And I think this has the potential to really revolutionize the number of organs that we're able to transplant. And all of this is, of course, thanks to dedicated and really talented surgeons and medical people that we have in our transplant program. And this is a group of transplant physicians who are working on an ex vivo liver apparatus here. And I'll just give you some examples of repair strategies. So we're kind of hoping, and we've already started doing this in the lab, is taking repair to a whole new level that initially sounds like science fiction, but we're actually very close. So for example, this is a set of lungs, and what we're doing here is delivering gene therapy to these lungs to actually fix the lungs while they're on the table. And what's happening here is a bronchoscope, or a tube, is being inserted into the lungs. And then through this tube, we're delivering something called a gene therapy vector, and it carries genetic information into the lung to actually repair it. And then here with a liver, on the tabletop here, what we're doing is assessing the liver vasculature in real time. So we're able to inject fluorescent dye into the liver vasculature and then image the liver while it's on the tabletop, and really get a close look at its anatomy and make any repairs that we need to repair. And what we want to do is, through this ex vivo repair strategies, is really we want to bring the world to Toronto. And here at UHN, we have an OR number 18, that's dedicated to organ repair. And what we'd like to do is bring organs from all over North America into our organ repair lab, repair them, and then send them out as necessary. The other area that we're actively researching is in a field called regenerative medicine, which includes a whole bunch of technologies, but one of the technologies is the use of stem cells or other types of cellular transplantation that can perhaps in certain situations replace the need for a whole organ. So, and I'll just show you an example. So one example would be to use liver cells rather than a whole liver for transplantation, or to use something called islet cells for treatment of diabetes. And those are the two areas which we're actively pursuing, and this video shows you an example of that. So this is a pouch which has these silicone rods that are inserted into the pouch, and then the pouch is put underneath the skin of the patient. And what happens over time is blood vessels grow into the pouch, and so they vascularize the pouch, so they provide the pouch with nourishment. And then what you do is you remove the silicone rods, and this creates an environment which you can then inject stem cells. So these could be liver cells, these could be islet cells that produce insulin, but whatever type of stem cell you want. And this produces a vascularized or nourished environment for these stem cells to do their work, and then hopefully it would obviate the need for a whole organ transplant in certain settings. And then ultimately where we want to go is bioengineering of whole organs. And the way you can do this is an example of a rat kidney. And what you do is you take a kidney and you inject it with various detergents. And what you do is you remove all the cells from the kidney, and you can do this with a rat kidney, or you can do this with a discarded human kidney. And what you do is you create a scaffold, you create a three-dimensional matrix upon which you can then repopulate it with cells, preferably eventually stem cells or cells from the patient you want to give that organ to. And what you do is you make a tailor-made organ for that patient. And this just shows that this is the scaffold here at the top here in the white. That's the scaffold or the matrix. And then you repopulate that scaffold and you actually grow the kidney right over here. And this is an example of a liver using, again, an animal model. So this is the original liver, and then you put detergent in it and you create this scaffold. And then upon that scaffold in this bioreactor, you repopulate it with cells, you make a liver, and here the liver has been transplanted into another animal. And then finally, the other thing we're exploring is new clinical programs. So one example is what we call VCA, or vascularized composite allograft transplantation, or hand transplantation. And here you can see the idea is that with hand transplantation, you can actually achieve excellent functional outcomes. And you can see very nice mobility of the hand and really good strength actually with hand transplantation. And we're looking at launching that program hopefully within the next year at UHN. So I think the future, as I see it, looks really, really good for transplantation, transplant-related technologies. And we have a group of really dedicated people with a shared vision. And I think with strong donor support, I think that's part of the key. We can really transform the way we do things, develop new breakthrough technologies, and really make a global impact for UHN, for Toronto, and most importantly, for our patients over the next 5 to 10 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Humar. That was incredible. I'm going to invite Dr. Levy and Megan to come up on the stage. We're going to do a question and answer period, and so if that's all right with you. It's up to you. So we have a couple of staff with microphones, and I'd like to invite you, if you have a question, to raise your hand, and someone will come to you with the microphone, and then you can address it to one of our 3 speakers here. Thank you. Can someone just turn the lights up? Thank you.
Megan, did they basically change your DNA with that last treatment? Is that what basically happened when they...
So maybe I can answer that, and then Megan. So maybe I'll help Megan. The answer is no. We didn't. What we did is 2 things with Megan. Number one, when she got very sick the second time with the lymphoma, it was apparent that the chemotherapy was not the route to go. Had we gone down that route and we had a long discussion, we wouldn't be here talking about this today. So we had to make a change, and we had this basic science program. So we have a branch. I didn't get to share. We have a branch point. We tested her to see whether or not she had a state of tolerance. And could we just completely eliminate immunosuppression? The answer was no. Megan was not tolerant to her graft. So what we decided to do was, and we offered this to Megan, which was a little unusual, was to take her marrow out, to take cells out of her, and to isolate primitive stem cells. There are ways now of doing that. There are markers. They're not absolutely definitive, but you can remove all of the memory that we have, which the memory, the immunologic memory. And what we did is we grew that stem cell, and Dr. Caravel is not here today, I don't think. I don't see John. Over at Princess Margaret, they did this in partnership with us. And then Megan went through a very harsh conditioning regimen. I think it's kind to say it was harsh, and that's where Megan was very courageous. She could have died from it. Just to give you an idea, 5 to 10% of people who go through this conditioning regimen succumb to the conditioning regimen. And as we go forward, we're going to be very mindful of that. And so she went through chemotherapy and a bit of a radiation, and it wiped out her memory. It wiped out. It's like wiping everything out except the skeleton, as Dr. Humar showed you with those silicone tubes, similar thing. And then we took those stem cells and repopulated. They're still Megan's DNA. It's Megan's DNA. This is called an autologous stem cell. Autologous. So all of you, we could take your stem cells out and do this. And the concept behind this was to re-educate Megan. Take her back as if we took her back into the womb of her mother and say, will her immune system, the primitive immune system, now recognize this foreign graft, she has a liver in her which she was not born with, and can we re-educate the immune system to recognize it as self, which is what tolerance is. And I'm happy to tell you, we've done I didn't get to show you all the immunologic tests. Megan sees that liver as self. She has no immunologic reaction against that liver, yet she reacts against organisms. The good news, she'll fight off infections. One of the bad sides of this, and we're correcting this, and Megan knows this, is that some of the immunologic memory she had, which is like vaccination against polio, diphtheria, which many, I'm sure all of you have had, she hasn't got that memory anymore. It's gone. So if she were to get polio infected, that would be a big problem for Megan, and we're reintroducing that vaccination schedule so that we can re-educate Megan. So I hope that answers your question. I'm sorry to steal the thunder.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for a fine presentation. In one of the earlier slides, you mentioned small bowel transplantation. Given the number of people in this country who suffer from both colitis and ulcerative colitis and Crohn's, what is the status of that program at this moment in time?
So yeah, that's a good question. So we have an active small bowel transplant program. Small bowel transplantation is generally reserved for patients with very, very severe bowel disease. And they're generally patients who have had large parts of their bowel resected or taken out surgically, for example, due to Crohn's disease or some other illness. And those patients are generally on what we call TPN, or total parenteral nutrition. So they get all their nutrition through intravenous because they don't have a small bowel that can absorb the food. So it's a small subset of patients, thankfully, who need that procedure. And what we've done is we've set up a very close collaboration with the people at Sick Kids who are part of our Transplant Institute. And through the Transplant Institute, we do both pediatric small bowel transplantation and adult small bowel transplantation.
I wonder if you could mention what other organs you think that you can regrow aside from the liver. I mean, are more complex organs and less homogeneous organs feasible that you can imagine?
Yeah, I think really the barriers are in developing the technology. And once the technology is developed, it could be applicable to almost any organ. So the ones in which it's been done in animal models are kidney, liver, heart, and lung so far. So all the major organs have been successfully performed in small animal models. And there's still a lot of developmental work to move that to clinical practice, but the theoretical basis is there.
Hi. Oh, sorry. I noticed on your chart there about developing the tolerance as what happened here with the liver. You're also looking at kidney. What about heart for heart transplant?
Well, first of all, we're going to look at all organs. I don't want anyone to feel left out. I saw some of my lung colleagues here, and we don't want them to feel we're not going to do this. We chose to do liver. Well, first of all, so I want to say Megan is unique in her own way. We actually have 2 other patients who have gone through similar protocols and are tolerant. They're liver patients. We chose to do liver partially because the liver does have a propensity. It has a propensity towards the development of tolerance. If many of you think if you had sandwiches out in the lobby, most of you ate them or you drank something and you didn't develop an immunologic reaction against the food. And yet the food came out of your intestines, went not in a solid form, but it came in molecular form to your liver, and your liver processed it and didn't see it as foreign. So the liver has this great potential to induce tolerance, and that's been reported by many investigators, as Dr. Humar knows. So one, we decided to choose liver patients. The second is we could define populations who were at high risk of losing their grafts, as Megan was, and losing their lives. And we saw real benefit there. The third reason we chose liver is that we had the live donor program. And as we go forward, we do plan a large clinical trial program, which will be based here at UHN. Part of it will be using those gene profiles, and that's where the DNA comes in. Many of our liver patients are tolerant. They are tolerant. And now using that profile, we will screen them using that profile, and then in an orderly fashion, we'll remove the immunosuppression. So we know about 25 to 30% of them are tolerant. We just don't know who they are. And we don't want to do it in a helter-skelter way because the risks are great. The other group who have problems, and we'll identify people like Megan, who are generally young, and by young we'll usually mean between 18 and 55. That's the group we've been recommended to target. We'll withdraw. Once we get a little bit of information under our belt, as Dr. Humar alluded to, we have discussed kidney as the next organ we would go to. One of the reasons is, as most of you know, it's the most transplanted organ in our society, and the half-life has not really changed over the past 30 to 40 years. The half-life of a kidney transplant is about 10 years. And what we need to start doing is getting away from what we call recycling. Once we get that, I think we will move to heart and to lung. We see a real benefit in lung, for instance, where we know immunologic reactions are real, and we might be able to reduce that through this. So we see it spreading, but we want to start in an orderly fashion.
But my question was, why don't you consider transplant and stem cells in the same time?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So first of all, we haven't decided. Many people have said that. I was down at NIH, National Institute of Health in the United States, and I showed the results of the 3 patients that we've achieved tolerance, and they were very much impressed. We chose to do it afterwards for the following reason. Around the time of a transplant, patients are very sick. Megan told you a little bit about her problems. So when she came in for transplant, she had her transplant in Montreal. But here, if you were to come to the ward and see the patients who are waiting for transplant, they're often very, very sick. They're very swollen, like the baby I showed you a picture of. They're very unstable. So to do a transplant and then do this harsh conditioning regimen and a stem cell, we know that even in patients like Megan, who were relatively stable at the time we did it, where there's a 5 to 10% risk, and we did explain that to Megan, I suspect the risk of mortality could be as high as 30 to 40%. And so I think the plan will be that we'll probably choose, and Dr. Humar will have a lot of input into this, as will many others, and the NIH and Health Canada will have input. I think the plan will be to do it probably 6 months, a minimum of 6 months after transplant, when the patient has recovered, at least partially regained their strength. I mean, Megan can speak to this. She told you she wasn't normal, but certainly 6 months after transplant, she was better than she was going into transplant. And we would want at least some degree of stability. And you can imagine if we were doing a heart transplant patient or a lung transplant patient, I think it's going to be very important that they're in at least a state of semi-stability. Yeah, the kidney may be the one exception, and there may be advantages, although I think the better question is what's the best time to take the stem cells out of the patient? And it might be a good idea to remove the stem cells if we're going to do this prior to the transplant going in, because what we don't want is any memory. And what we're doing, the reason why we're using such harsh conditioning regimens, and Megan could speak to that, she could actually tell you what it's like, is we have to destroy all that immunologic memory. And that's a very aggressive protocol. Maybe you want to say what it was like getting chemotherapy and radiation.
Very aggressive. I spent 3 weeks across the street at PMH basically in isolation, because they were dropping my system all the way down to 0, and that was the goal. I had to be really followed very closely and be careful with visitors. And I was as sick as I remember being, even after transplant. This was harder. Some of the chemo and the medications gave me a lot of side effects. I lost a lot of the skin on the inside of my mouth and in my digestive tract, and I really wasn't well. I wasn't myself. I don't remember a lot of it. I was so ill that there's a lot of time there that I don't recall. I just remember being in the ward, and that was the hardest one.
So I think the good news is she doesn't remember it. I like that part.
Some of it.
Some of it. That's even a better line. So I think we understand, and I think we've incidentally, because of the success we've had, we've been approached by many people around the world who want to have this protocol. What we want to assure you, and I think Dr. Humar, is that we're going to do this in a very orderly fashion. We believe this will work. And not only will it work for our transplant patients, what will probably be more impressive is, coming back to the question the gentleman answered over there, this may actually be a treatment for inflammatory bowel disease, rheumatoid arthritis, autoimmune diseases of the kidney and the heart and so forth. If we can prove that it works here, we may be able to re-educate the immune system and lessen the need to do transplantation, which is one of our large goals. It was a goal when I first took on this program. Of course, it remains elusive today, but we're hoping in the future it'll be realized. I'm sorry? Yeah, so Dr. Humar alluded to that. There are ways of taking stem cells and to reprogram them using transcription factors. And as Dr. Humar said, we have a program now here at UHN in the McEwen Regenerative Medicine. We have a partnership with them. We started, incidentally, the liver's not a monomorphic organ, despite what someone said. The liver has blood cells, it has liver cells, it has bile duct cells, it has immunologic cells, so it's also a complex organ. It's not simple, and the organs that are being transplanted in at the moment, even in the animals, have defects where tubes have to be created. So the technology is coming a long way, and we're working very closely with groups of scientists. But the answer is, using transcription factors, it may be possible to generate all different types of cells.
We have time for one more question.
I guess that would be me.
And one more here in the front as well.
Okay, thank you. My name's Marilyn. My friend has a daughter who's now 40 who has both the liver and the bile ducts involved. So I have watched her go from 33, where she just had autoimmune liver disease and had to get sicker and sicker and sicker, and she's now on the transplant list. She's not here, she's in BC. Am I right in thinking that sometime in the future, she would be treated at 33 for her autoimmune liver disorder with, say, something like the stem cell protocol, while she was well enough, like sick, but
Right.
well enough to tolerate it?
That would be the goal. The goal would be to take people who have immune-mediated disease and to try and to re-educate the immunologic system. In other words, we would leave the liver where it is, as long as it's healthy enough. We would remove stem cells, just like we did with Megan, and then reimplant. We would try to destroy the memory. And there is evidence that this will work. There actually are some early data emerging that this approach will work. So unfortunately, we can't roll the clock back. I wish we could, but if I could, Dr. Humar, he would be younger than 40. I would be younger than a certain amount. But we can't, obviously, these will be plans for the future. And if this technology works, it will then move into non-transplant situations.
And do you accept people from other provinces?
As a matter of fact, I was just saying, I was just on the phone. We are working 2 people up from British Columbia who are coming here for live donor transplants
Now,
because of the expertise that we've generated here.
would somebody who has a cadaver donor be a candidate for any of the work that you're doing?
So it's a little bit of a complex question, but if a patient moves to Ontario and needs a liver transplant, we would place them on our deceased donor waiting list for liver transplant. They would be on the waiting list as long as they're Canadian, they would be on the waiting list, along with all the other people on our waiting list.
And how long is that waiting list at the present time?
It's, our primary problem in organ transplantation is not enough donors. So the waiting list is very long. And for liver transplantation, it's prioritized by how sick the patients are on the waiting list. So the sicker patients are higher up on the list, and the patients who are not as sick are lower on the waiting list. And unfortunately, what we're finding is many patients are very, very sick by the time they get to transplantation. And the reality is also that many patients do die while on the waiting list, and hence the need to develop some of these technologies to give alternatives and to improve the number of organs we can use and things like that.
And that's why I asked the question, because I think everybody needs to be taking that state that it is in now out into the public so that we have more awareness of that. But I'm also wondering how we got to that state. If we know that the healthier you are when you're diagnosed might increase, do we know that it would increase your chances of survival?
Certainly when we transplant patients who are extremely, extremely ill going into their transplant, it takes them longer to recover, and they do have a lower chance of recovery after transplant, although our outcomes are still excellent even for the sickest patients. But we normally do not, for deceased donation at least, we do not have the luxury, because of the long waiting list, to transplant patients until they're at the top of the waiting list. Living donation is another story. There are many advantages to living donation. Allows patients on the liver transplant waiting list to be done sooner, before they reach that critical stage where they either may be too sick to receive a transplant, or they may actually die on the waiting list. Yeah, no, it's important. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Levy, Dr. Humar, and the nice lady. My question is, how about for eyes? Can they be transplanted like those who suffer from retinal detachment or glaucoma or whatever? Thank you again.
Well, we do. So first of all, we do what we call eye transplant, but it's not really eye transplant, it's corneal transplant. So there are two forms of that. One is, if any of you, when you go out, look in a mirror, and you'll see that you have a pigmented part, which is the pupil. You have or rather, outside you have the cornea rather, and the white part, and then you've got a hole in the middle. It's the pupil. If at a certain point in time, corneas can be recovered from deceased individuals and implanted, and they will take. The other approach is what's called a limbal or keratolimbal or a stem cell transplant. All of us have stem cells at the corner of our eye, and our corneas are being replaced about every week. Every week your cornea will be replaced. So if you scratch it, don't try to rub it off. They put a patch on and it generally will replace. If it won't replace, you can get what's called a keratolimbal or a stem cell transplant. That's done at the Toronto Western, although it's done in partnership with the transplant. No, we do not do retinal transplants. So the eye is a complex organ which consists both of the front part, which is the cornea, and then there's the part, the detection system, as you alluded to, which is the retina, and unfortunately that can't be replaced presently, although, as Dr. Humar alluded to, and he didn't have time to talk about all the exciting work, at the University of Toronto, people are growing retinas and they're regenerating, and the plan will be to try to implant those retinas eventually. They are doing preclinical experimental animal work at the moment on that.
Thank you very much.
Well, I would like to ask everyone to please join me in thanking our three speakers today. We've had a lot of lectures here, but I would say from my own personal experience, that was very, very interesting and accessible in the sense that we could all really understand exactly the kind of work you're doing. So thank you so much for that presentation. There's a number of other staff here in the audience today from the multi-organ transplant program. They have name tags that have their names in red. So as you're gathering today on your way out, perhaps if some of those staff have time to stay around for a few moments, they might be able to answer any additional questions that you might have. As we mentioned earlier, we have our newsletter, Report on Your Support, which features the transplant program, Megan, Dr. Levy, and Dr. Humar, and we have additional copies at the registration table if you're interested. And I also have two colleagues here from the foundation that are hard at work raising funds for the transplant program. I'll just ask those two colleagues to stand. We have Josh Lai and Debbie Findley, who's at the back, and certainly also well-versed and able to answer any questions that you might have about the program. If you have any questions about any of our upcoming events, I would invite you to contact Rebecca Valenti. And Rebecca, if you could perhaps stride to the front here. Rebecca is at the other end of the telephone when you call and you have questions about your donations or about the events that are coming up, about the society that you perhaps belong to. So just putting a face to the name. So please always feel free to contact Rebecca. And that would be it today. I would just like to conclude saying thank you once again for continuing to support our hospitals, for the wonderful work that we're doing. We really couldn't do what we do without your support. Your investment is what really makes UHN stand apart from other hospitals, not only in the GTA, across Canada, and our impact is global. So thank you for coming. Thank you for your support, and have a lovely holiday. Thank you.